Something that's really fun about these IP-focused games is how players and fans spend so much time focused in on trying to make their favorite character work, maybe sometimes regardless of how good it is within the game itself. So today I want to go into the Wayback Machine, have a little fun, and look at some of the characters that did wrong by Fantasy Flight Games. A huge shout out to our channel members for supporting what we do here. If you want to get involved with the channel and the Dice Commando community, please consider joining as a channel member. Remember, these videos are only possible with your support. You can show that support with a like, a subscribe, and by leaving us a comment and sharing your feedback. Community first, and go Commando. Hey there, my Star Wars Destiny friends. Welcome back to the channel, and happy Destiny Friday. Thanks for checking in. So today we are pouring one out for the boys, or the ladies, as it may be, and going back to the FFG days of the game and looking at some heroes who we were super excited. We're like, I want my character to be in the game, right? I want to see Ahsoka. I want to see whomever it may be. And then when they came, well, as much as we tried, we just couldn't get them to work. Now, what's fun about this, actually, is when I sat down to kind of compile my list, I actually expected it to be a lot longer than it ended up being. And in retrospect, I think the reason why is that because FFG historically took so long to get new sets out, we had a lot of time in between sets, and people basically tried every iteration to make them work. So it was actually and that's a fun surprise, right? That's kind of a fun learning to go through and be like, you know what? Actually, that character stinks, but it actually was in a deck. Like Rookie Pilot, yeah, story was, Rebel Trader was going 4 wide with that back in the ATG days. And I just think that's pretty fun, right? Because I'm like, oh man, there's got to be like 10, 15 characters. But there's not. There's actually only a handful. Furthermore, there's a couple of them that were redeemed. And let me go ahead and pull up the window cap here so you can see the DB set. But what's very interesting about this is basically all of the Awakenings characters saw play. It was the first set. Nearly every single character found a home. Now, there were certain characters, like you would look at Akbar in a vacuum and be like, Akbar wasn't super good. Like, why was Akbar? Well, because he was actually paired with Luke for a while, Snack Bar, right? It was one of the best ways to play Luke when only Awakenings was out. So basically, there are no functional Awakenings characters in this. It doesn't mean that there aren't bad characters from Awakenings, but it was hard for me to put them on this list because basically all of them saw play. But then we came to Spirit of Rebellion, and that's where things got rough because they were still trying to figure out the point systems and stuff like that. And if we go look at some of the characters we had, like, I don't know, Mon Mothma, and this one's for you, Jay Danger. Like, love you, buddy. Hope you're out there watching this because you knew this was going to be on the list, right? Poor Mon Mothma at 14 points. I think they what we believe at the end at 9 health too, right? And that he was even back. I mean, that's not even in today's standards. That's way back then. But the thing was, having multiple resource sides on a character was kind of a big deal back then, right? So Mon Mothma just never really worked. Not for lack of people trying, but she was a meme deck and never got redeemed ever in the history of Destiny. We then come to Oh Poor Luminara. So Luminara was actually a pretty legit character. So 1/2 focus, resource, and a special. Resolve one of your character dice, increasing its value by 2, or 3 if it's a non-unique character die. That's actually pretty neat. Now, 10 health on a character that is 17 points elite, again, even back then, that's a little low. And it was very clear that the intent here, obviously, was her to be played single die. Because back then, you had 7-point characters and 8-point characters as your non-elites, or your non-uniques, excuse me. And there were no elite, right, back then. So in order to play her with 2 of them to be able to bring 2 dice to the table, you were then looking at a 3-dice start with your centerpiece being a relatively soft character at 13 points with 10 health. And, later on, I think she got a points adjustment down, but even with that, she never really worked because later on we got, let's go down here, skipping ahead, we got good old, where's Plo? He's in Way of the Force. Oh man, all the way down here. There we go. There's Plo. So Plo was 14 points and worked a dual Padawan, right? So look at Luminara compared to Plo, and the story writes itself why there was really no reason ever to go. But now Plo wasn't, making their dice do things, did weapons, but functionally the idea was to play him with the two non-uniques, the Padawans, and you ended up having a really good deck there with an 11-14 versus a 13-17. So she was one character, going back up to poor old Luminara. She was one that she just got did wrong. Just failed to launch on that one. Now, there was some other characters in SO. There was actually quite a few characters in SOR that were not very good because of, you look at like Jyn Erso or even Director Krennic, both of whom were exceedingly high point values for what they did. In theory, they were good, but the point values were just way too high. However, they ended up getting redeemed later on. So, the red version of Jyn at 16 points, the pair with Cassian, was amazing. The Krennic that came out in Covert Missions was really cool with the whole build. Maybe he wasn't good, but like he was good. I mean, he was fun. It was well done, right? With the whole build the Death Star thing. So, it's hard to put them on a list. Now, we do have these random, and I'm going to call them the Imperial officers. And I know he's a First Order, but whatever. But we had kind of this full range of, Hux, Piet, Firmus, all these other guys. And they all kind of fit like really the same functional mold. And it was really hard to kind of, distinguish them. Some of them saw some play with Palp later on. Like, was it Tag or whoever the heck they paired with Palpatine most of the time. But, I don't think anybody's like, oh, Hux is my favorite character or Tag is my favorite character. So they did not make my list as much. One I did have on here that hurt my feelings was Chirrut. And Chirrut, the problem with Chirrut Bays was that, again, this was in an era of SOR, it was an era of Star Wars Destiny where most of the pairings, like most of like the thematic pairings ended up being 3-die. You look at Han Chewie, right? And this was like, not so great Chewie. I mean, sure, there was some Yoda pairings with him and stuff, fair enough. But you look at Chewie, not so great. Look at where'd my guy go? Chirrut. So Chirrut struggled, and then, the no blue abilities thing made sense, but he couldn't play with Bays. And, the two of them weren't redeemed until ARH popped their head in the room and made a really cool deck with them. Another one was, and I know this one is maybe not as, popular, but because people did try to get her to work. But Ahsoka Tano is a character who came out, had two versions in the FFG days. And I think she done get now. Obviously, I'm kind of biased on this because I really wanted a cool Ahsoka because it was my wife's favorite character. But we tried to get this to work with Kanan, and her ability, she was probably relatively fairly costed, if we're being honest with ourselves. She was probably relatively fairly costed for what she probably could have maybe at least done, at least in like Magical Christmas Land. But functionally, for 17 points at 11 health, that's not a good die, right? And again, at 17 points, she had a very limited, if she'd been at 16, I think it would have been a very different story. Being at 13 made it really hard to find her a pair. And then if we go all the way down to her other version, right here, the Brash Prodigy was clearly made just straight up to work with Anakin, right? And he came in Covert Missions, right? So whether she was designed first and he was designed to fit with her, they were designed as a pair. They were released in different sets, so who really knows how it ended up working out. But she was really hard to get to work just because she was too soft, and the modifiers were kind of weird because you had to have her paired with a Jedi, and mono color decks were always challenging. So I think ultimately Ahsoka never really done. Was she done did wrong? Maybe not, but she was never done right, I think, for how fan favorite of a character she was. And not just my wife, but like she's one of the most fan favorite characters out there. Now, another fun one who I have to put on the list. Now, to be clear, I don't think there's a lot of people out here who are like, Boss Nass is my favorite character. Right? But Boss Nass was pretty weird in that they didn't really have a thing for him. And like, so after you activate a Gungan, deal indirect equal to number of character dice, just roll a blank. Okay, so the Gungans are supposed to screw up. Cool, that's the thing. I love the theme. That's really neat. But at 9/12, with a Gungan warrior being at 6 is weird, because that means that you're on Nass and 3 Gungans. And it's a lot of health, but yeah. And then you want to play him, why wouldn't you have wanted to play him with Jar Jar Binks, who, if we're being honest, one of the best thematic designs like in the game, but he was 7. So then you ran into this weird thing where you couldn't run Boss Nass Elite plus him, and if you were running Boss Nass not Elite, the math still didn't work because you'd have Jar Jar at either 7 or 9, and then Boss Nass at 9, and then it doesn't work to get you years. It's just weird, right? And I get the ideas like come in and do all the rerolls and stuff like that. It was fine. It never really, like, even on like, even on paper, like Magical Christmas Land, it didn't even really work. Not for lack of somebody at least trying, like, out of a meme deck, but nobody would have even taken that to like a real tournament outside of like, dice and beers. Outside, what's interesting is that there's a bunch of other characters that I did want to sit down and talk about, like original Finn, and actually Dean, Swag Dean, I was talking about this. He mentioned him as well, but he ended up getting a pretty decent reprint in Legacies. It's just that he never really found the Legacies version of him never really found a partner. Like, if we go look at his Legacies version, it's actually like that's a pretty legit character, and it actually had one of the best dice EVs in the game because of the damage move, right? Assuming there was that's a 2 damage side. So it's a 2 + 2, 3 resource, 2 and a 1, or in a blank. That's pretty good, right? He just never really found a good partner until much, much, much later on. And then by then stuff had power crept, and he had a pairing, but he didn't really have a place, if that makes sense. And then, another one I wanted to call attention to was K2SO, like the OG version. I think they really did him wrong here. It was kind of neat. And again, I think this is another situation that kind of falls in like with Ahsoka, where I think it makes sense why they had him costed where he is, because they didn't want him to like be super crazy with what could in theory happen. But realistically, this just wasn't functional with him, right? Because if you're going to ready him, you want him to be 2 die, but then, you know what I mean? Like, you had to somehow kill your other character, and it had to be a 10-pointer, and it just didn't work. He, however, got very much redeemed with the better version of K2SO that came out right here, which actually ended up being a key piece in the archetype of the quote-unquote bad droids deck. So my boy K2 did get his redemption. And speaking of, one that got unredeemed was Ezra Bridger. So the first Ezra was kind of garbage, but paired really well with Sabine, so that made sense. The next Ezra was like pretty legit I think it was an 8-pointer, a 9, either way, small Ezra was really good, but this was just absolute. Yeah, small Ezra was 8/11, and he was really good. Plus he had his baller lightsaber, so anyway, kind of an interesting one there. But Chewie got redeemed, and a lot of those characters did end up getting redeemed. IG-88 was one that was complete garbage and then ended up getting a pretty dang good version later. So they did a pretty good job with some of the fan favorites, but ones we never saw again, like good old Mon Mothma or Luminara, will forever live in infamy in Star Wars Destiny. So let me know who your fan favorites were that did wrong. I think that's it. Either way, folks, thanks for joining, and go Commando.